Imagine for a second that you have reached the absolute peak of the mountain. You've got the money, the fame, a perfect family, and just pinnacle career success.
Right, literally everything society tells you to want.
Exactly. You acquire all of it, and you get to the top, you look around, and you realize that it means absolutely nothing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a terrifying psychological space to inhabit.
It is. I
Yeah.
mean, you feel worse than nothing. You feel a despair so deep and just so completely hollow that you actually have to hide ropes from yourself so you aren't tempted to end your own life.
Because that realization completely shatters the fundamental illusion most of us live by, you know? The idea that external achievement will eventually buy us internal peace.
Yeah, and when the external world gives you a standing ovation, but your internal world is just collapsing, that dissonance is unbearable. And we aren't talking about some modern celebrity burnout here. We are talking about Leo Tolstoy.
Right, the literary giant himself.
The year is 1879. He's 51 years old. He has already written War and Peace and Anna Karenina.
Basically the greatest novels ever written.
Yeah, he's a wealthy estate owner, a beloved father and husband, globally recognized as a literal genius. Yet his life comes to a complete, paralyzing standstill. Welcome to today's deep dive.
It is such a fascinating turning point in history to look at.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to explore this profound midlife crisis experienced by one of history's greatest minds. We are drawing on detailed analyses and excerpts from his 1882 spiritual autobiography, A Confession.
Which is just a brilliant, brutal piece of self-reflection.
Totally. We really want to look at how he meticulously mapped out the human search for meaning. Because to understand this crisis, we have to understand the premise. He was tormented by one specific, inescapable question.
Yeah, the question that broke him was, at its core, devastatingly simple. He asked, well, if God does not exist, since death is inevitable, what is the meaning of life?
And for you listening, I mean, this isn't just abstract philosophy. This is the quiet panic that creeps in at 3 a.m.
Oh, absolutely.
When you wonder if your daily grind, your emails, your mortgage, your promotions actually matter at all, if we're all just going to disappear one day. It is the universal dread of mortality.
And to understand why worldly success failed him so spectacularly in answering that dread, we really need to look at how his psyche was built in the first place.
Right, let's look at his early life.
So Tolstoy grew up in the Orthodox Christian faith, but he lost it incredibly easily, like almost casually.
The sources describe a moment when he was just 11 years old. A schoolboy visits his family and announces, basically out of nowhere, that there is no God and it's all an invention.
Just drops that bomb at dinner.
Right. And Tolstoy and his brothers just shrug and accept it as a highly interesting fact, that the belief just melted away. It wasn't some dramatic crisis of faith.
Which really highlights how fragile inherited belief can be when it isn't tethered to a personal lived experience. It was just a cultural garment he took off.
Yeah, and we see this later when his older brother Dmitri actually became devout, fasting, attending services, striving for a morally pure life.
And how did the family react?
They didn't support him at all. They mocked him. They nicknamed him Noah and relentlessly ridiculed his sincerity.
That is so telling, and Tolstoy looks back on his own youth with absolute horror because of that dynamic. I mean, he was gambling, fighting in wars, killing in duels, lying, stealing.
All the classic destructive behaviors.
Exactly. But the bitter irony that he realizes in hindsight is that whenever he actually tried to pursue moral goodness, high society ridiculed him.
Just like his brother.
Right. But when he yielded to his low passions, as he called them, he was praised. His peers rewarded his worst, most destructive behavior.
So how does a person even survive that kind of environment without losing their mind?
Well, he relied on a psychological defense mechanism that we now call sublimation. Sublimation is essentially taking an uncomfortable, unanswerable dread, like the meaninglessness of your own existence, and redirecting all that nervous energy into something socially acceptable and productive.
So basically distracting yourself with work.
Yes. For Tolstoy, he channeled his inherent human need for meaning into the idea of progress and perfection. That meant getting richer, becoming more famous, and writing the greatest novels of his generation.
But eventually, the sublimation just stopped working. The external applause couldn't drown out the internal void anymore. I mean, he even describes his own literary circle as a lunatic asylum.
A lunatic asylum, yeah. He says all these writers arrogantly believed their job was to teach humanity, but none of them actually knew what to teach.
They were just arguing and shouting over each other to get praised and paid.
It was an echo chamber of massive egos. They genuinely thought they were the philosophical saviors of Russia, which just made their underlying emptiness even more dangerous.
Yeah, they were prescribing medicine for the human condition without knowing what the disease was. It instantly makes you think of modern social media influencers or thought leaders.
Oh, totally.
Everyone is shouting on the internet, desperately trying to monetize their audience, but they're terrified to admit they are just as lost as the people watching them.
It is the exact same dynamic, just with better technology.
So if his wealth, his writing, and his peers couldn't save him, where does a guy with Tolstoy's intellect even look for answers? Did he turn to the scientific community?
He did. Being a brilliant intellectual, he naturally turned to the accumulated knowledge of humanity. He divided human inquiry into two hemispheres. You have the hard sciences, like biology and physics, and the abstract sciences, which is philosophy.
Right.
So he started where any rational person would, the hard sciences.
And science gives him an answer, but it's completely useless for his crisis.
Yeah.
Science explains the how, but it entirely ignores the why.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that science essentially tells him you are a temporary cohesion of fermenting particles in infinite time and space.
Factually accurate, sure, but philosophically bankrupt if you're looking for a reason to get out of bed in the morning.
Right. Science answers its own independent questions clearly and exactly. It explains the mechanics of the fermenting particles, but it just loops around the question of human purpose. It refuses to engage with the why.
So, hitting a brick wall with biology and physics, he pivots to the abstract. He turns to philosophy. But from what the sources say, philosophy is even worse.
Oh, it is much worse.
It actually recognizes his question, but it offers the darkest possible answer. He reads Socrates, Schopenhauer, the Buddha, King Solomon, and they all essentially come to the exact same conclusion.
That life is vanity, it is suffering, and passing into nothingness is the only logical good.
Yes, Solomon, a king with palaces and endless wealth, says all is vanity. The Buddha, a prince who left his kingdom, says life is suffering.
This is the fast track to what psychologists call existential despair. Reason, by its very nature, compares the finite to the finite. It demands cause and effect.
Okay, I follow.
But it cannot mathematically solve for the infinite. When you try to apply finite tools, like human logic, to an infinite timeline, which is death and oblivion, the tool breaks. The equation just loops back on itself. 0 equals 0.
Wait, I have to stop and push back here. Are we really saying that Socrates, the Buddha, Schopenhauer, literally some of the smartest people who ever lived, all concluded life is basically a trap?
Yes, essentially.
That feels incredibly bleak. How do you even argue against the greatest minds in history? I mean, if they couldn't logic their way out of a meaning crisis, aren't the rest of us basically doomed?
Well, you can't argue against them using logic. That's the trap Tolstoy fell into. As long as you stay within the confines of intellect, their grim conclusion is entirely mathematically sound.
Wow. So intellect alone just confirms the despair.
Exactly. And before Tolstoy finds the flaw in that approach, he feels completely paralyzed by his own intelligence. To encapsulate this agonizing intellectual trap where reason only points to death, he uses a terrifying and ancient Eastern fable.
Oh, this fable is visceral. I love this part. Picture this. A man is running away from a wild beast, and to escape, he jumps into a dry well. But at the bottom of the well, there is a dragon with its jaws wide open waiting to eat him.
Classic nightmare scenario.
Right. So the man clings to a twig growing out of the side of the well.
He can't climb up because of the beast. He can't drop down because of the dragon. He is suspended in pure terror.
And as he is hanging there, his eyes adjust, and he sees two mice, one black, one white, and they're crawling on the twig, constantly gnawing away at the wood.
Well, wait, it gets worse or better depending on how you look at it. On the leaves of the twig, there are 2 drops of honey.
Right, so the man reaches out his tongue and licks the honey. And for Tolstoy, that honey represented his love for his family and his passion for his writing, the fleeting pleasures of life.
But the tragedy of the fable is that eventually the honey loses its sweetness. The man can no longer enjoy the taste because his intellect has been awakened.
I knows about the mice.
Yes, he knows that the black and white mice representing day and night, the relentless march of time, are destroying his only support. The dragon of death at the bottom is inevitable.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about those drops of honey in our lives today.
Oh yeah, they are everywhere.
They are the modern distractions we use to numb the dread of our own mortality. We scroll on our phones for 3 hours a night, we chase the next corporate promotion, we obsess over buying a new car.
We are just frantically licking the honey while the mice keep chewing away our time.
That is so dark, but so true.
And that is the absolute crux of human consciousness. Once you are aware of the dragon, once your intellect forces you to look at the reality of inevitable death, you cannot unsee it.
Ignorance is just gone.
Ignorance is no longer an option. The human brain won't let you permanently regress to a state of not knowing. So the ultimate question becomes, you are hanging in the well, the mice are chewing, the dragon is waiting. What do you do?
So Tolstoy looked at his wealthy, educated peers to see how they were surviving this nightmare. And he noticed they were essentially playing 4 different games of psychological hide-and-seek.
4 distinct responses.
Yeah. Some just buried their heads in the sand. This is the first response. Ignorance. Just refusing to look at the dragon, pretending the well is just a nice place to hang out. But Tolstoy knew he couldn't force himself back into that state.
Right, because of his intellect. Others took the second route, which he called Epicureanism. This is the hedonistic approach, licking as much honey as possible while aggressively ignoring the mice.
Like partying your way out of the dread.
Exactly. But Tolstoy found this morally bankrupt. He realized this response is only available to a tiny privileged minority. It requires wealth and status, completely ignoring the vast majority of humanity suffering outside the palace walls who don't even have access to the honey.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So then a few took a much darker, strictly logical path. The third response, suicide. Tolstoy actually calls this the most intellectually honest response.
Because if reason dictates that life is a cruel, meaningless joke, the logical thing to do is just end the joke.
Yeah. He admits quite plainly that he was too cowardly to do it, but he respected the mathematical consistency of it.
Which left him stranded in the 4th category, holding on. This is living out of pure weakness.
Just hanging there.
Yeah, it is knowing that life is meaningless, knowing that reason dictates you should let go, but just hanging there on the twig anyway, paralyzed by dread. This is exactly the miserable state where Tolstoy found himself trapped.
But there is a massive paradox staring him in the face here. If logic points to suicide as the most intellectually honest choice to a meaningless existence, why do millions and millions of people wake up and choose to live every single day without despairing?
It's the ultimate question. Why aren't we all just giving up?
Right.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that paradox is the exact thread that unraveled his entire crisis. He had a sudden, ego-shattering realization.
What was it?
He realized that his massive, celebrated intellect had tricked him. He thought his tiny circle of rich, depressed, highly educated intellectuals represented the entirety of the human experience.
Oh, wow. He literally thought the billions of other people on Earth were just stupid. That they just hadn't read enough Schopenhauer to figure out how terrible life was yet.
It is the ultimate arrogance of the intellectual elite. But the paradox forced him to finally look outside his bubble of privilege. He started observing the peasants, the ordinary laborers on his estate and across Russia.
And what he sees completely short-circuits his logic.
Totally.
These ordinary people endure extreme hardship. They face sickness, brutal poverty, physical labor that breaks their bodies, yet they approach life with a quiet joy, and they approach death with complete tranquility. They aren't paralyzed in existential despair.
Crucially, they didn't find this peace through logic or philosophy or science. They found it through what Tolstoy defines as irrational knowledge.
Irrational knowledge.
Yes, and he identifies this irrational knowledge as faith.
I want to pause on that word because when a lot of us hear faith, we immediately think of organized religion, blind obedience, or, rigid dogma.
Right, the institutional stuff.
Yeah, and Tolstoy hated a lot of that. He found church dogma, especially its justification of war and violence, to be utterly hypocritical. To him, this irrational knowledge wasn't about nodding your head to a list of theological rules.
Far from it. Faith, in this context, is the psychological mechanism that connects the finite human life to the infinite. Logic demands proof and finite boundaries. Faith transcends the boundary.
Okay, that makes sense on paper, but how does it work practically?
To explain how this actually functions in practice, Tolstoy uses a brilliant analogy about a beggar and a pump handle. Imagine a starving, naked beggar is brought off the freezing street into a beautiful, complex estate.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
He is given food, water, and shelter. Then the master of the house asks him to do one simple task. Just move a single pump handle up and down.
Now, if the beggar is an intellectual, he sits down and refuses to touch the handle until he understands everything. He wants to philosophize about the mechanics of the pump analyze the architecture of the building, and debate the ultimate intentions of the master. He just sits there analyzing the mechanics while the garden outside dies.
But if the beggar bypasses his need to analytically understand everything and just starts moving the handle, what happens?
Well, he sees that his action draws water.
Yes. The water flows into the garden beds, the plants grow, they bear fruit, and they feed the estate. By doing the work, by performing the action, the entire logic of his existence suddenly makes profound sense to him.
He doesn't need to understand the blueprint to the house to know his action has meaning.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? This is the ultimate aha moment of the whole deep dive. Tolstoy didn't just get tired of thinking and blindly join a religion to feel better.
No, not at all.
He realized that logic is a closed loop. You cannot think your way out of a meaning crisis because the intellect only measures the finite. Action, moving the pump handle, is the only way to bypass the intellect's closed loop and access the infinite. Faith is an action verb, not a noun.
It gives finite suffering an infinite significance. It doesn't eliminate the dragon of death waiting at the bottom of the well. It doesn't magically make the mice stop chewing away at your time.
They're still there.
They're still there, but it transforms how you view them. Meaning, isn't a math problem you can solve on a chalkboard? It is a reality you have to live your way into.
You just have to start moving the pump handle.
Yeah.
So, external success, no matter how grand, will never cure an internal crisis of meaning.
Never.
And extreme intelligence, ironically, might just build a more sophisticated cage for your despair. Sometimes, the wisest thing a brilliant person can do is acknowledge the failure of logic. Look at how resilient people manage to live and start doing the work of living.
This is incredibly urgent today. In our current era of relentless information overload, we are constantly trying to logic our way to happiness.
All the time.
We think if we just read enough articles or optimize our morning routines enough or acquire enough data, we will finally crack the code to peace. But Tolstoy's crisis proves that using logic to solve the infinite is a mathematical impossibility.
The math just doesn't work.
Right. The more data you feed a closed loop, the faster it spins, but it never actually gets you anywhere.
It just makes the dread more articulate. I want to leave you with one final, deeply visual thought to mull over today. About 3 years after he wrote this confession, Tolstoy wrote about a dream he had that perfectly encapsulated this shift in his worldview.
I love this dream.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
In the dream, he is resting on a bed made of woven string supports. As he fidgets and tries to analyze his position to get more comfortable, the strings start slipping away.
Oh, no.
Suddenly, his legs are dangling, and he finds himself hanging by his upper back over a bottomless, terrifying abyss.
And the more he looks down into the darkness and fear, trying to calculate the depth of the drop, the more his supports slip. His analytical terror is literally pulling him down.
Yes, the dread is causing the fall. But then, in the dream, he forces himself to stop looking down. He shifts his gaze. He looks up. He looks up into the immense, infinite sky above him.
And what happens?
The moment he fixes his gaze on the infinite, ignoring the mechanics of the abyss below, he suddenly realizes he is perfectly balanced. He is securely supported by a single pillar and a loop holding him from above. As long as he looks up, he cannot fall.
It is a stunning metaphor for his entire philosophical breakthrough. You cannot dismantle the abyss, but you can choose where to direct your focus.
So think back to that peak of the mountain we talked about at the beginning, or the well with the dragon, or the bed of strings. In your own life, are you staring down into the abyss of your anxieties, obsessively applying logic to your fears, and causing your own supports to slip away?
It's a heavy question.
It really is. Maybe the core problem isn't the abyss itself. Maybe the problem is simply where you're choosing to look. What would happen if, just for a moment, you stopped looking down, bypassed the closed loop of your intellect, and looked up into the infinite?